Mr. President as a board game was created by GMT Games, and the founder of GMT Games, he just loves American history. And he spent 10 years making this game, the analog version of it. What inspired us to really make the digital version of it and add our tweaks is two things. One, as a former Army officer, I thought about really, our engagements in Iraq and Afghanistan and, why we lost there. And I think one reason is we didn't focus on the political landscape. So I thought if I'm going to make something with this company, might as well, make a game that can focus on the other instruments of national power, not just military. The other part, I'm just a fan of this topic as well. I think as many of the people in the audience here, I just love this topic. National security, wargaming, and so on.
If you could tell us in a nutshell, I know it's hard in a nutshell, but how does the game work?
In a nutshell, the game is essentially a world simulator. So you take an action, there's a reaction, and there's randomness decided by the dice. So you're playing as a US president, and you have a limited number of actions to take per turn, and you have to deal with some domestic challenges and some foreign affairs. Good things can happen to you in the game as well.
Jonathan, James rather, you've had a chance to play the game now. Do you have to be a geopolitical expert to play along?
No, not at all. I think it's actually a very intuitive interface, and it's something that really lots of different people with lots of different backgrounds can really get into and enjoy.
Jonathan, what was one of the biggest challenges in creating it, going from a board game now to a video game?
When it was just an analog game, it takes up the entire table, which is why many people didn't end up playing it. So going to digital, one concern we had was maybe it goes too fast, and people don't have enough time to grok why a certain thing happened. Another part of the digitization of it, which we're considering, is how do you balance engagement versus maybe civic engagement. Having worked in the gaming industry and also at Facebook, we know that we know what causes engagement, which is more divisive. So we decided not to put that in the game, which may hurt us from a profit perspective, but we like kind of where it is at right now.
I'm glad you mentioned that. We're not talking partisan politics with this game.
That's right. For those of you who've demoed it today, there's no parties here. You have supporters in Congress and you have opponents, but there's no specific parties mentioned in this game.
James, many people acknowledge the importance of AI for national competitiveness, for national security, of course.
So one thing that obviously stands out is simply the amount of time that people spend doing things like paperwork, right? And as we have things like these large language models that are able to just consume enormous amounts of text, right? I think the Defense Department could easily save millions of man hours with relatively little effort if they simply applied this towards things like filling out forms and the basics, right? But then at the high end, we really want to see things like these decision support kind of tools, right? Where we ask, as the amount of equipment and things acting grows, so we see in Ukraine, for example, thousands of drones being used in attacks and things, right? Well beyond the ability of any individual person to really understand and prepare for, right? And so things like AI can really help us scale and increase the speed of decisions by helping people sort of understand the crux of the problem and understand what they should be doing to counter it.
I agree, mainly because that's kind of the thesis behind Exia Labs. Use technology, including AI, to improve decision making. We've got products for the military, and this is more geopolitics. And I think one big thrust of what got us into this also was that we read that China is really leading in AI war games, and that is an area I felt that the U.S. Should be number one in, especially since we created the technology.
How are war games playing out for our military leaders? What are some practical applications of gaming or AI that you're seeing or working with recently, James?
I think there's a few different things. So, for example, we at the Special Competitive Studies Project ran a war game a little while ago to bring a bunch of private sector technologists in to think about how we could use advanced technologies to defend Taiwan, right? So we really used a unique experience where we used a war game for familiarization to bring these people sort of up to speed on what the military problems look like and sort of what the military struggles with. And then we use them to sort of say, okay, what can our technologies do? Where would they solve these problems? As opposed to the military sort of asking for a specific thing, We let the technologists like really brainstorm and come up with good ideas, and then we sort of applied that to see how much the game had changed and how much better the United States did, right? I think that's a really good way of sort of leveraging the private sector for what it's good at, and bringing in DoD experts for what they sort of know, and getting people sort of what we call muddy, right, to understand the real crux of the problem.
Jonathan, what do you think?
So one big area we're focused on is replicating human behavior. So that's part of a lot of my research at Stanford. A lot of our efforts so far has been how to replicate really, PRC leadership. But based on just, hosting this event and talking to people here, we want to make sure we simulate or emulate our allies as well. Because it's not just, the US and someone else deciding something. There are other, players involved. So I think one big area where AI can help in the world of war games is to simulate the actions of allies and enemies.
Some of the crises that play out on Mr. President are almost eerily similar to real life issues that we've seen on the world stage and preceded them, I imagine, when you were developing it. You didn't know that the Venezuelan leader, Maduro, was going to be captured by U.S. forces. How does your gaming and AI, how does it impact our national security in the long run, whether it's the types of scenarios we train for, or how we recruit or train, or the technology that we adapt?
A lot of credit goes to the original game designer who spent a lot of research, and we were surprised by just how a lot of the current events map to the game. And I think our key takeaway is that history really repeats itself. That's interesting. And another aspect of what we're going to do going forward, so the game's early access is going to be Monday, which means we're going to work on the game more. How we plan to work on the game more going forward is to leverage more just current affairs. So we can leverage AI to quickly create new assets based on things that are happening in the world.
And today's release of Mr. President is just for congressional staff, right? When can the general public have a turn at it?
Next Monday.
What do you want the takeaway for players to be? And I guess let's start with you, James. What was your takeaway when playing the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think this does a good job of showing just the sheer complexity of what people have to deal with, and the fact that you can't choose, this is the only thing I'm going to do and try and accomplish. Reality sort of forces an agenda on you, even as you're trying to accomplish your own strategy.
And Jonathan, what was your hope?
There's a lot of hope. I hope it does well commercially, but beyond that, two other areas. One is just more civics engagement. I think, more Americans can learn more about how government works. In this game, you have to work with the legislative branch and things of that nature. The other part, since a big part of this game is about foreign affairs, is I'm wearing like a NATO tie. I like the concept of working with our allies, which we'll be covering in the next panel. So I want to convey that to be successful in this game, you have to work with your allies. We do have some opponents in the game. And also you have to work with our allies in the legislative branch to accomplish things as well.
I should have mentioned at the top that we do have time for questions, if anyone in the audience wants to ask a question.
Yeah, curious about, for James, curious about that technologist game. Right? What are some of the learnings that you could share from that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a couple of things we took away. So one of the technologies that we advocated for in the game was advanced mines. That has a disproportionate impact on China's ability to invade Taiwan. Basically, so there's more or less three ways that people can get across the strait, right? There's large aircraft, paratroopers, there's helicopter air assault, and there's ships, basically, right? So in general, the military and our experts believe that the large aircraft is a problem that we have under pretty well control. The large aircraft are very vulnerable. The Russians learned that at Hostomel, for example. And so we sort of focused on the two threats, and we have pretty promising technological solutions for both, right? So these small drones, like we're seeing in Ukraine, are very effective, potentially at intercepting helicopters at a very cheap rate. And so if you could essentially deter China from even trying an air assault to move troops, that's a significant sort of win for Blue, right? And then advanced mines, so sinking ships through torpedoes and explosive underneath the water, right, are a very effective way at sort of deterring an invasion. And so that was something that both our players and we basically brought in sort of a shark tank at the end to evaluate the solutions. something that everybody thought very highly of as a way of, we almost thought of it as like roving wolf packs of minds that could affect the Chinese invasion fleet in some very interesting ways.
I'm wondering, what are the ways that most people lose the game, and also are there any kind of foolproof strategies to win the game?
I don't think there are any foolproof ways to win. From an entertainment perspective, a lot of the starting positions are randomly generated, so a lot of different things can happen. I think, like real life, a lot of players are drawn to maybe military or foreign affairs, especially. You may not get to control that in your day-to-day life, and then you forget about the domestic part, which maybe echoes a lot of what's happening in real life as well. So you could really lose if you don't pay attention to what's happening in America, legislatively, or we even have like domestic terror groups in the U.S. as well that you have to account for, or the economy. You can invest your actions into things like that. And some players, at least new players, are all just, let's go send some aircraft carriers to XYZ location.
When we talk about recruiting the next generation of command staff or diplomats, I think there's been last 20, 30 years, video games, first-person shooter, learning how to navigate urban warfare, and operate a drone. This is a totally different way of maybe training the next generation. Anything you want to say about how gaming and technology in general can be part of the recruitment and attraction and retention efforts for both diplomacy and other security professional roles?
Yeah, certainly. I think the military, for example, has long used sort of video games as a way to try and recruit personnel. So I believe there's an Americans Army game, for example, they released on the Xbox a few years ago. So yeah, I think that's often a way to attract people's attention and sort of draw in more recruits. I think the other thing that war games can potentially be very useful for is there's the job you do when you start and you're an early career person, and then there's the job you start to do as you become a mid-career person, and that's not really the same job, right? People have to learn to stop being good as an individual person, and they have to start learning to lead teams and make higher level decisions. And so I think gaming is a good way to try and help teach people sort of in the middle of their career how to make that transition more quickly and more effectively.
And I would add, ultimately, whether it's a game or a simulation, the idea is you try to do something you haven't done before in an environment. It could be virtual reality, it could be a PC, it could be whatever. Our hot take was to do something more like this versus an America's Army, which I played, many years ago. And I think the part of the reason why I was attracted to building this specific game, last night I actually had dinner with someone. He was from the State Department when we were both in Afghanistan together, and just reminiscing and being here for this Mr. President event, thought maybe think about kind of using every instrument in national power. I was working with Department of Agriculture in Afghanistan, things like that. So I think this could be a good tool to really. At least on the military side, let them, consider the other, executive branch partners they could work with.
And what's the reaction been from members of the military who have had a chance to play the game?
We've primarily interacted with the senior service colleges, and at least for that demographic, they seem to really like it because they talk a lot about, dying, but there really aren't a lot of tools for them to really manifest that. We haven't engaged with more, junior officers or soldiers yet, where we're kind of curious what that looks like once it releases next week.
So I might add one thing real quick. So one thing I actually really like about this demo and the idea of these kind of games. So we try these war games. War games have been very valuable for policymakers for many years. But they're always very expensive to make, and they're always very long to execute, right? So when you have senior level people and you're trying to bring them in for a full 8-hour day, these are busy people. They don't necessarily have time for that, right? And so things like this show just how well you can potentially reduce the cost of making a game in the first place by using these kind of tools. And then you can also reduce the amount of time for players. So as you guys play this game, you'll see how much time goes into rolls and sort of working through cards and things. And the computer can do all that much more quickly than compared to human adjudication can take an hour or two at a time. Whereas this will often reduce that to maybe something on the order of 10 minutes. So you can get much more senior people much more engaged if they're sort of focusing on their actions as opposed to people moving cards around the board and things.
Was there a fixed amount of time for competition moving to crisis and then conflict, or
So we could create defined scenarios. What we're launching Monday is really like a sandbox mode, so it's randomly generated starting positions. But part of what we want to showcase, so there's obviously the commercial game. There are people who might just like this as a hobby. But if we were able to find a partner in the government or the military that wants to really, focus on their specific situation, it's pretty easy to customize, which kind of goes to James' point. We built this as like a fungible asset so that, if maybe you're a different nation state, you're Estonia, we can easily tweak this to be focused more on Eastern Europe with a specific timeline and Estonian specific, capabilities. We could really take the game in a lot of directions, but one thing we have not added to it is really the competition for, let's say, AGI, if you believe in that, right? So theoretically, whoever reaches AGI or ASI first, you could win, whether it's in real life or in this game. And then, there's a lot of details of how we get to that point. What does that race look like? Is it a frontier AI labs? A lot of economics involved. So we're very fascinated in that type of scenario development as well.
All right, I think we'll wrap things up here. Jonathan Pan, James Ryseff, thank you both for sharing Mr. President with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth.